We might just get started. So Emerald Clinics, we've got Michael Winlo, CEO here. Emerald was a recent IPO, listed 20 cents. Obviously a pretty interesting time to list in terms of, whilst it's not a cannabis company, the cannabis market was certainly being impacted, and then we've gone into lockdown with coronavirus. So it's been a unpleasant welcome for a newly listed company, but there's been some overhang, I think it's fair to say, in the stock that was actually cleared yesterday. So it's rather timely with good news this morning and a clear runway ahead for Michael to present. So I'll throw it over to Michael. Any questions that you've got throughout, we'll answer them at the end. But thanks very much, Michael, and go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for joining this afternoon, wherever you are. Pleasure to be here, and pleasure to tell you a little bit about Emerald Clinics as well. I guess right from the outset, what I'll mention is that Emerald is really two businesses operating in harmony. We have a network of medical clinics across Australia. That's one part of the business where we see patients and provide care. The other part of the business, though, is the data and evidence generating aspect of what we do. And that is a big part of our focus and future revenues as well. And we'll explain why we've set up our operations in that way to be both a clinic and also a data and evidence generating company as well. Usual disclaimer here, this is a presentation that is available on the ASX website as well, but I will give an update on how the COVID has affected us in our response so far. So really, we plan in the medicinal cannabis field, although our model could apply potentially to any therapy. As with all unregistered products, there exists an evidence gap. That's why they are restricted, have restricted access. And over the last few months, people have been very excited about the growth in patient numbers on patients receiving medicinal cannabis, mostly through the special access scheme. But really, all of those prescriptions and all of that high patient growth has occurred because of early adopter clinicians writing scripts. If you look at the actual number of unique prescribers writing those scripts, it's a relatively low number, especially compared to the number of potential prescribers out there in the market, and certainly low patient numbers compared to the potential many millions of patients that might stand to benefit from these treatments. And so we're really only in the early adopter part of the curve, despite the up and to the right sort of trend lines. And really, for medicinal cannabis to hit mainstream medicine, for it to become a widely used tool by clinicians, one needs to bridge this evidence gap. And we hear a lot about the lack of evidence supporting medicinal cannabis. And it's one of the key things holding it back. It's not just regulation, it's not just fiscal conservative governments or skeptical clinicians. There really is a lack of true, robust clinical evidence to back up the support of these treatments. And what that's led to is clinical apprehension amongst regulators who won't formally endorse it, certainly in payers, another big group that really needs to be brought on board here. They are yet to pay for these treatments. None of the medicinal cannabis drugs, bar one, is on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme or similar programs around the world. And so, again, we need really good clinical evidence before payers will pick up the bill and we can take the cost burden off patients. And of course, the other challenge here is clinicians are overwhelmed with the number of products that are available today. In Australia alone, there's over 100 different products that could potentially be prescribed, but there's no clear guidance to doctors on which product should be used for which patient, what are the adverse events to worry about, are there drug-drug interactions that one needs to be concerned, what are the benefits we can expect, when do we know when to stop treatment, and so on. A lot of open questions around these treatments, which has probably contributed to the fact that only a relatively small number of clinicians get involved in these treatments, and that's certainly creating access challenges as well. So we saw this as an opportunity to both provide care and generate this evidence, which is lacking, and that's the driving motivation behind Emerald Clinics. Because if you don't do this well, if you don't get that evidence, you're going to see major regulators moving in. The UK has already put onerous requirements on CBD providers, that's cannabidiol, to prove the quality of their products. The FDA has already issued multiple warning letters to companies stating claims of benefit for their products without being able to back those claims up with evidence. Those formal warning letters have then subsequently led to legal class actions against companies, which have really damaged some of those companies' reputations and finances. And we expect this to become more aggressive over time as more companies emerge. And what the FDA, what the UK, what these other major regulator agencies are stating is that you must show the evidence before you can tell the community or talk to clinicians about the potential benefits and clinical uses of your treatments. If you do this well, and GW Pharma is a company that has done the more traditional pharmaceutical development pathway. They have spent to date in excess of $700 million on clinical development for both their treatment and medicine. They have a very narrow targeted orphan indication with rare form of epilepsy for a plant-derived CBD product. And by getting a claim, by getting through the regulator hurdles with credible clinical evidence, they have been able to generate $300 million US of revenue in the last 12 months, which is greater than all of Canopy Growth, another Canadian company in the industry of medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis. But GW Pharma's single year of revenue is far in excess of the entire revenues of companies like Canopy and their peers, Aurora and so on. It's because they've got a really compelling claim for their product. Each of these doses, a regime of their product for a year is $32,500 US. They have 98% coverage from payers in the United States, and that's what's really led to tremendous growth for that company. And now what we see them doing is expanding those indications. So now they've got a claim, they've got coverage, they've got a clear prescribing pathway, access to patients. Now they're seeing how their products are performing in the real world, seeing that it may have benefits for other adjacent indications, and then building claim evidence packages around that and adding to the claims and indications that their treatment can be used for, as we can see them going after some other rare indications as well, which is only going to further grow the market for this company. And so that brings us to kind of the role that we see us playing in this, in that the traditional clinical development pathway is very long, it's very expensive, it costs many millions of years and take many, many years. There are alternative models and approaches though, which borrow from the real world evidence that can be gathered and collected from medical practices. And if one can organize that data in a robust way, we can glean insights about where treatments are working, for which indications, and for which patient groups, and make claims around that. And the FDA and the major European regulator agencies as well have really opened their world up to accepting real world evidence as a complement, in some cases in lieu of clinical trial data, which, as I mentioned, can be a lot more expensive and timely to generate. And so what we're seeing is regulators shifting their rules, big pharmas now investing in real world evidence. There was an article a month ago, CSL, Australian biotech company, investing in real world evidence, building a digital strategy in recognition that some of the key data that they were going to need to advance their new treatment programs will exist or will be generated in clinical practice, in the process of treating patients, as opposed to the very highly controlled environments of clinical trials. And what that has created is great opportunities for companies like ours to develop real-world evidence approaches to help with that clinical development. Probably the most famous company in that space is Flatiron. Flatiron was a company that gathered cancer patient information, spent many years and many hundreds of millions of dollars curating that data asset. They were able to help drug companies make new claims on their treatments by looking at the real world use of these novel drugs. Roche purchased them for $1.9 billion US a couple of years ago, and their chief medical officer, Dr. Amy Abernathy, was then headhunted at the FDA, where she is now Deputy Commissioner and also in charge of the cannabidiol regulation framework that's being written as well. So we see these worlds kind of merging in the future. So a little bit about our model and what makes it unique. We have a clinical service. We have 4 locations, 9 consulting rooms, 12 GPs and a couple of specialists across our clinical service. We have clinics that see patients in person or via telehealth, and we perform very thorough evaluations on these patients. Each of them are vetted. We know all of our patients have unmet clinical needs, so they represent a very important patient cohort to understand. And we carefully manage their treatment program with these medicinal cannabis using the best available evidence that we do have to make appropriate treatment choices. We are completely independent of the providers, although we do support research programs with a few of them. We have no privileged relationship, and so our prescribing choices are made completely independently and with the patient's best interests in mind. Each patient is then invited to participate in a care program that is expected to last as long as they're on treatment, and in some cases beyond that. And as part of that, patients are contributing data, they're co-creating evidence with us, and we're capturing data in a special system that allows us to ensure the data is extremely high quality and very usable as clinical evidence to support drug development. So our data services team is a very active part of our business, capturing this evidence, curating it, running the statistical analysis, and then generating insights that partners purchase from us or engage with us to support. And as you can see, this model could apply really to any unregistered product or any really novel care intervention, and we anticipate moving into other domains in the near future. The reason why this is so important is we sit up in that top right corner. There is usually a dichotomy that's outlined where if you have clinical trial data, you have generated data of exceptional quality, but because of the very tight inclusion and exclusion rules around a clinical trial, many times the data has low external validity, meaning the patients in that study do not typically look like patients a doctor might encounter in the real world, with all of the variances and complications and other drugs and conditions that real world patients tend to have. So on the other side, we know that if we can get data from medical practices, we know that that looks like the real world, very high external validity, but frequently the data is of very low quality. And you might be able to relate to that anytime you've been to your GP, you've seen a referral letter, you see how the pressure of serving the transaction often doesn't lend itself to really deep and high quality data capture and curation. So we saw an opportunity here if we could develop a clinical model that was set up the right way from day one, that was designed to maximize the utility of the clinical evidence we've captured with our patients, then we would address this challenge of generating data of really high quality, but also of very high external validity, a really robust real-world evidence. And so in our system, we don't use a typical electronic health record. We use a clinical trial master file. We don't just allow the clinician to make up any assessment. We used licensed, validated, quantitative health assessments on each of our patients. And we use the same kinds of assessments that are used in clinical studies so that we know that they're ready to be used to support drug registration as well. And this means we can glean really unique insights on our patient population. So here's a snapshot of, say, the adverse event profile. And just to give you a high-level glimpse of the kind of detail that we are capturing. So not only the incidence of adverse events, we're qualifying them, we're understanding whether they impacted treatment or not. We can look at in which patient groups they're more likely to occur, what the precipitating risk factors might be. And all of this really rich adverse event data is the kind of detail that one needs to support the drug registration in this country and in other major regulators as well. And so there are a few unique things about this. One is the breadth of the data we're capturing, but also capturing in a data model format that allows it to be used to support drug registration as well. And we're seeing really powerful anecdotal evidence, which is being echoed out at the population level as well. And we have this great case study of a gentleman called Bob, who was a Vietnam veteran. He is not atypical of many of the patients we see. Long-standing chronic back pain with peripheral neuropathy, was on a range of medications, a whole raft of them, getting very little benefit, but he was highly medicated when it came to CS. And within a few weeks, and in the coming months, he was able to reduce all of his concomitant medications on a moderate dose of THC CBD combination. And as you can see, not only did he receive a benefit in his pain, but also in other quality of life measures, which just show, I guess, the broad potential of these treatments. Pain interference came down. He was sleeping better, had lower levels of depression and anxiety as well in his life, which all obviously contribute to a really good outcome for this patient. And that is why paying attention to these measures is really important, because each patient has their own response to these treatments. Some may find they have moderate pain benefit, but they start to sleep better, or their anxiety improves, or they simply can substitute some previous medications with a poor adverse event profile for these treatments, which are mostly safe. And those other benefits could be missed if one was simply paying attention to a single symptom or clinical feature. The space that we're in is attracting a lot of interest. We talked about Flatiron before. There are new companies in this field, Verana Health and Etion, or at least in the field of real-world evidence. None of these, though, manage a clinical service, which means they are obtaining their data from registries, from electronic health records, from practices and hospitals, and then investing huge amounts of capital in cleaning and curating that data. They are not able to run clinical trials either. By having a clinic, by maintaining the clinical service, and by having a high degree of influence over the clinical routines and behaviours of our doctors, we're able to ensure that the data we capture is very high quality from day one. So the registries we build are already very expressive and that detail. We're also able to turn on clinical trials very quickly as well to complement the data picture that we're producing, which we think gives us a really good advantage over these companies. But these other ones are certainly worth taking a look at. You can get a sense, certainly, of the global interest and energy that's going into the real-world evidence space. Even though it's a relatively new term, I think, in the Australian environment, globally, it is absolutely getting a lot more attention. And just to explain where we generate revenue from then, the major upside comes from the sale of our data and evidence services. So sponsors pay Emerald for access to our data picture. We can provide that in a number of ways. These can be snapshots. These can be a patient cohort that's got a particular disease of interest. It could be simply some anonymous data for patients taking a specific product, and we can provide those as annuities or subscriptions. We can also be consulted to design and conduct clinical trials to complement their evidence picture. And that's the left-hand side, the data revenues. And then on the right-hand side, we have patient revenues as well, coming from the delivery of the care. And those have been growing as our brand and profile has been increasing. Referral numbers and patient numbers have been growing steadily. And of course, clinic revenues have been growing in line with that as well. And so that makes our business quite robust in challenging times like we are today, which I'll explain in a moment. So far we have a clinical service. We have 4 clinics around Australia, a total of 9 consulting rooms, 12 GPs. We are still looking at other sites around Australia or other means of delivering services to a broader population as well. We are in conversations with a London group to open there, and I believe in many ways we can get started despite the current environment that we operate in terms of data sharing and collaboration to be able to access a European population as well. Our platform is highly scalable. It's rolled out and complies with all the highest regulatory requirements as well. And importantly, can still capture this data from patients even in a remote consultation. So my last few slides here, but this is just to echo back kind of how sponsors or data purchasers may engage with us. We can do one-off reports. Typically, an engagement might start with a single view or snapshot of anonymous data from us that would then convert into disease-specific insight. Okay, now I'm interested to see all of your inflammatory bowel disease patients, all of the adult autism patients that you have, or the chronic pain patients and so on. And so we start to go deeper into understanding those patient populations and how they're responding to these treatments. We can give product-specific insights as well. I'd like to see all the patients that are taking product X and see how they do compared to product Y. And that's a service we can provide as well. And of course, we can run clinical trials as needed for these groups, and have completed our first one recently for Isolera. And then ultimately, though, this relationship doesn't end after one of these engagements, because once a product is registered or out on the market, there's an expectation that companies are still paying attention to how patients are doing in the pharmacovigilance program, or really in this post-market monitoring of these therapies as well. A little bit on COVID, because I know that's on everybody's mind. So we always had a telehealth option, which obviously has become a lot more popular lately. I'm pleased to say that it was very easy for us to extend and expand that as well in a way that still allows us to capture all of the key clinical data that is important to us in our follow-up and monitoring programs. Patient engagement's been terrific. I think last week about 80% of our consultations was performed via telehealth. This is important to us. It allows us to keep our patients safe. Most of our patients are elderly. All of them have chronic diseases, and they are a vulnerable, high-risk patient population. So if we can treat them at home, that's terrific, and maintain our service. And we really haven't seen any drop-off on our patients so far. And then finally, what this has enabled us to do as well is extend a real evidence platform into COVID patient monitoring, where we can use the same system we've got evidence around patients who are unwell in self-isolation in the diagnosis, to understand how they're faring out in the community. And so we're in conversations with a number of groups to help with that service, because there just typically isn't general GPs and clinical services that are able to respond with the tools that we have at our field. That's it from me. I'm happy to take any questions. We have a terrific board of notes, so John, I'll let you guys read that in a moment. So, 5 minutes for
Sorry,
questions.
Michael, I'll just chime in there. Thanks very much for that, just because we've got one question that's been sent on the email. What are other potential new drugs or areas you could potentially move into with your clinics?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. So really, any drug that's past phase 1 or the basic human safety data, or is believed to have a low safety risk. So this includes the class of the psychedelic medications that are being evaluated for mental health disorders. It includes any program that's gone into a phase 2 or a special access scheme only model. But really, any treatment that for which there is a relatively well understood safety profile, either anecdotally or through a phase 1 study, could lend itself to us. We could be an alternative to phase 2s, allowing a broader population to access treatments with careful monitoring to understand who's responding.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Michael. If there's any more questions, obviously email, everyone's got my email, and Michael's details are on the bottom of Emerald's releases as well. So we'll finish up there, but thanks very much, Michael. Next up, we've got CV Check, and just a reminder, for anyone who has any issues in terms of audio or visual, going into the next slide, next preso, just refresh the screen. That should solve the technical issues. Thanks everyone for joining, and see you soon. Thanks very much. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.